Yeah, you know it's getting real now. You know it's getting real now. You know we weren't making things up. We wasn't just tripping. Oh, Stephanie White got on camera and said it. She admitted they blew it. There's no size on the team. There's not enough size. Stephanie White finally admitted her, Amber Cox, Kelly Crosskoff in the front office blew it again for a second straight offseason. They blew it in an offseason in which 80% of the players were free agents. This is nasty work for Caitlin Clark, man.
There are moments in sports media where the people who have been paying attention, the ones who've been doing the real work, reading between the lines, watching the tape, following the money, tracking the roster construction decisions with a critical eye, those people get to watch a very specific kind of vindication unfold in real time. Not the loud, chaotic vindication of a blowout game or a catastrophic loss. The quiet, devastating kind. The kind where the head coach of an NBA franchise sits down in front of a microphone, looks directly into the cameras, and says the words that confirm everything the critics, the analysts, and the honest fans have been screaming into the void for months. That just happened in Indiana. Stephanie White just gave us that moment. And I need you to understand the full weight of what she said, because the mainstream sports media is absolutely not going to connect these dots for you. They are too busy protecting relationships, too busy maintaining access, too busy spinning narratives that don't offend the executives who run this league. That is not what we do here. We have a tagline for a reason. This is where the cover story ends and the real story begins. And today, the real story is sitting at the intersection of a head coach's public admission, a front office's catastrophic off-season decision-making, and the long-term future of the most commercially transformative player the WNBA has ever seen. Welcome to Simply Explained. Let's get into it.
You'd like to see out there, or do you figure those out on the fly?
No, I mean, I think we've started to sketch some together. What we'd like to see, who we'd like to see play with each other in an ideal, situation. We've started to put some of those together. New York also presents some challenges because of their size and their length, and we're not very big.
You just realized that? You just realized that New York.
Before we break down exactly what Stephanie White said and why it matters so deeply, we need to establish the context. Because without context, the admission loses its full magnitude. So, let's go back. Let's talk about what this offseason was supposed to represent for the Indiana Fever. 80%. 80% of the players in the WNBA were free agents entering this offseason. Read that number again and let it settle. In the history of professional basketball, men's or women's, there are almost no moments like that. A moment where an organization can look at the overwhelming majority of the league's talent pool and say, we have the ability to reshape this roster in any direction we want. We can address every single weakness. We can build toward a championship. We can do something truly special. The Indiana Fever had every advantage imaginable going into that free agency window. They had cap flexibility. They had organizational momentum. They had the story of a franchise on the rise. And most critically, most devastatingly critically, they had Caitlin Clark, the most electrifying offensive weapon the sport of women's basketball has ever produced. A player whose gravity on the basketball court is so immense, so mathematically undeniable, that any coach with half a strategic understanding of modern basketball would immediately recognize what she needs to be maximally effective.
You should have known that. They got Satu at 6'4", Brianna Stewart at 6'4", Jonquel Jones at 6'6", 6'7". I'm telling, didn't they, brother? Lady Phoebe 6'4", 7-footers coming off the bench, like.
Let me explain that strategic reality in plain language, because it is the foundation of everything that follows. When you have a point guard, when you have a primary ball handler and offensive creator who draws defensive attention, the moment she steps across half court, the entire geometry of basketball shifts around her. Defenses don't wait to react to Caitlin Clark. They scheme before the play even develops, help defenders rotate early, double teams form while she's still in transition. Every opponent she faces is running a defensive action plan specifically designed to take the ball out of her hands and force her teammates to make decisions. This is not a criticism of Clark. This is a testament to how dangerous she is. But it creates a non-negotiable roster requirement. If you want to maximize a player like Caitlin Clark, you need to surround her with players who are physically imposing enough to punish those collapsing defenses. When help comes from the corner, you need a wing who can shoot over a rotating 6'4" defender. When the lane closes, you need a forward with the height, the post presence, and the ability to catch the ball at the elbow and score over the top of a scrambling defense. You need size. You need length. You need players whose physical dimensions alone create matchup problems that force opposing coaches to make impossible choices. The Indiana Fever's front office understood none of this. Or worse, they understood it and ignored it anyway. Because when the free agency window slammed open and 80% of the league was available, the Fever went out and built an army of guards. They drafted Raven Johnson, a spectacularly talented player, genuinely one of the most exciting young guards in the draft class, who stands 5'9". They retained a rotation of guards measuring 5'8", 5'9", scattered across multiple positions on the floor. They made financial commitments that consumed enormous chunks of salary cap flexibility. And they walked into a new season with a roster that, from a pure physicality standpoint, is dangerously ill-equipped to compete with the best teams in the Eastern Conference.
Caitlin Clark, you got Sophie and Lexi on the wing. That's cool. Outside of that, these guards is little as hell. We got a bunch of little 5'8", 5'7" point guard, two shooting guards running around outside of Caitlin Clark. It doesn't make sense.
Now, if you've been here with us on Courtside Leaks, none of that analysis is new to you. We've been breaking it down. We've been explaining the basketball geometry. We've been following the money trail and raising the alarm about the implications for Clark's contract situation and the long-term health of this franchise. What is new is that the head coach just publicly confirmed everything we've been saying. Stephanie White sat down with media ahead of the preseason and was asked about her rotation plans. Specifically, she was asked whether she had started sketching out who she wanted playing alongside each other, whether those decisions were mapped out or improvised on the fly. It's a routine question, the kind of thing coaches answer every preseason with careful, measured, PR-friendly language designed to project confidence without revealing strategic plans. What White said instead was remarkable.
Challenge us to be the best that we can be, but at the end of the day, we're all humans who love this game, who love to be around each other, who value shared experience. And when I think back on my career, it's not always about winning the championships and hanging the banners and getting the rings. It's about those days where we struggled in practice and the journey with your teammates and the relationships that you have to this day because of that journey.
She acknowledged that yes, she had started putting together some rotation ideas. She said she had a sense of who she wanted playing with whom in ideal situations. And then, completely unprompted, she brought up the New York Liberty. She said that New York presents some challenges, not because of their offensive firepower, not because of their defensive schemes, not because of their depth or their experience. She said, New York presents challenges because of their size and their length. And then she said the 5 words that should send a chill through every single Fever fan who is paying attention. We are not very big. Stop. Process that. The head coach of the Indiana Fever, in a public media session before the first preseason game has even been played, looked at reporters and acknowledged on the record, with her name attached, that the roster she has been handed is not physically equipped to match up with one of the premier teams in the Eastern Conference. Now, let's talk about who the New York Liberty are rolling out this season, because context matters here. The Liberty are deploying Brianna Stewart at 6'4". They have Jonquel Jones at 6'6". They have Sato Sabali at 6'4". This is not just a tall team. This is a team that was constructed with deliberate, sophisticated intentionality to create size mismatches at every single position on the floor. They are a towering defensive wall designed to clog passing lanes, protect the rim, contest shots at the point of release, and make life extraordinarily difficult for undersized opponents who are trying to generate offense through movement and spacing. Against a team like that, height isn't just an advantage, it's a weapon. A game-defining, series-altering weapon. And Stephanie White just confirmed that her roster doesn't have it. This admission alone would be significant. Coming from a head coach mid-season, when the games have been played and the flaws are exposed, it would be honest and candid and perhaps even admirable. But this is coming before the first preseason game. This is coming in the window when coaches are supposed to be projecting confidence and articulating a competitive vision. The fact that White reached for this kind of unvarnished honesty before a single meaningful minute has been played tells you something critically important about the severity of the problem. She isn't managing expectations. She is issuing a structural warning. And the people who are supposed to have prevented this structural problem, General Manager Lynn Dunn, Kelly Kroskoff, and the broader Fever front office, are the ones who made the decisions that led directly to this moment.
Y'all, it made no sense, some of the moves y'all was making. Y'all called us complainers, all types of stuff. So now when it's real and the live bullets is going on, we not using size as an excuse. I'm not letting you use that. Absolutely.
Think about what was available. Think about what could have been done with 80% of the league in free agency, with Caitlin Clark as a recruiting magnet, with the financial flexibility and organizational momentum the Fever possessed. There were tall, skilled forwards on the market. There were long, versatile wings who could provide the physical dimensions this roster so obviously needs. The Fever had every tool imaginable to build a physically complete team. They chose not to. And now their head coach is standing in front of cameras, explaining that they are, in her own precise words, not very big. If the size admission was a tremor, the second thing Stephanie White said was a full earthquake. During a media session discussing the new collective bargaining agreement and the financial implications for the league, White made a comment that, to my knowledge, has almost no precedent in professional sports coaching history. She used the word baffling to describe the salary numbers her own front office committed to during this offseason. She called it crazy. Those words, baffling, crazy, did not come from an anonymous source. They did not come from a former player speaking on background. They came from the sitting head coach of the Indiana Fever, describing the financial decisions made by the organization she works for. Let me walk you through what those financial decisions actually look like, because the details matter enormously. Kelsey Mitchell received a Supermax contract at $1.4 million. Aaliyah Boston received a 4-year extension worth $6.3 million total. Sophie Cunningham was re-signed at $665,000. Lexi Hull received an extension. Tasha Harris was brought in as a veteran presence. On the surface, each of those deals can be argued individually. Mitchell is a dynamic scorer. Boston is one of the better young bigs in the league. Cunningham provides shooting and versatility from the wing. Every one of those commitments, examined in complete isolation, has some justification behind it. But Stephanie White is not examining them in isolation. She is looking at the full portfolio of financial commitments, and she is doing the math. She is asking the question that every analytically rigorous general manager should have been asking before inking these deals. After all of this spending, what do we have left? What can we still build? What pieces can we add to close the gaps that this roster construction has left wide open? And when she does that math, apparently what she gets is baffling. That word is not chosen casually. Coaches are media-trained professionals who understand that everything they say in front of a camera will be replayed, dissected, and quoted. When a head coach uses the word baffling to describe her own organization's financial decisions, she is communicating something very specific. She did not have significant input into those decisions, and she is not comfortable with the constraints they have created. Think about what that actually means for this organization right now. The head coach and the front office are not operating from a unified strategic vision. They are not rowing in the same direction. They are not building together toward a shared championship blueprint. Instead, you have a front office that committed significant capital across a guard-heavy roster and a head coach who is publicly processing in real time, in front of cameras, the question of what she can actually build with what's left. In a functional franchise, this dynamic does not exist. In a functional franchise, the head coach and the front office are deeply aligned. Roster decisions are made collaboratively. Financial commitments are made with a clear understanding of how each dollar spent affects every subsequent decision in the roster-building process. The coaching staff knows the plan. The front office executes the plan. And when the plan is presented to the public, everyone is speaking from the same script. That is not what we are watching in Indiana. What we are watching is a head coach trying to do the math on a budget she didn't design, trying to build a rotation she didn't architect, and using words like baffling to describe decisions she apparently had little influence over. And that disconnect is deeply, deeply concerning for a franchise that should be executing a coherent, long-term vision around the development of the most important player in the history of women's basketball. Here is the angle that nobody in the mainstream sports media is connecting. Here is the thread that you will not hear pulled on SportsCenter or in the approved press box narratives that protect the league's public image. This is why Simply Explained exists. Caitlin Clark is entering the final stretch of her rookie contract. She is approaching the moment when she will be eligible for a massive extension under the new CBA's EPIC provision, a clause specifically designed to reward generational players with compensation that begins to reflect their actual commercial value. That extension is going to be worth several $1 million per year. It is going to reshape the Fever's financial landscape in a fundamental way. And the cap space that is consumed today by every extension and signing and contract that has been handed out in this offseason directly affects the Fever's ability to build the roster they are going to need to surround Clark once that extension is in place. Let me make this as simple as possible. Every dollar spent today on a crowded guard rotation is a dollar that is unavailable when Clark's extension kicks in, and the Fever need to go out and address the physical deficiencies that are already plaguing this roster. The salary cap is not infinite. The financial windows for building a championship-caliber team around a superstar are narrow and unforgiving. You have to spend with a plan. You have to spend with a 2 to 3 year vision of where this roster needs to be, not just where it needs to be for the next 6 months. When Stephanie White describes the salary numbers as baffling, she is essentially revealing that this front office did not spend with that plan in mind. They spent aggressively in year 1 of the new CBA, the first year, when the new financial structures created real opportunities to lock in talent without fully mapping out the implications for year 2, year 3, and the critical window when Clark's extension reshapes everything. This is the kind of organizational myopia that derails franchises for years. It is the kind of short-sighted decision-making that forces future front offices to make painful corrections, letting players walk, trading assets, swallowing bad contracts in package deals, or in the worst case, watching a generational talent quietly grow frustrated with the organization's inability to surround her with a championship-caliber supporting cast and begin exploring her options. We are not at that last scenario yet. Let me be clear about that. Caitlin Clark has shown no indication of anything other than total commitment to winning with the Indiana Fever. But the foundation being laid right now, the financial constraints, the size deficiencies, the disconnect between the front office and the coaching staff, is not a foundation designed to keep a generational talent happy and competitive for the long haul. And the people responsible for that foundation are not the ones who will be answering for it in the media. Stephanie White will be the one at the podium after tough losses. Stephanie White will be the one trying to explain why her team can't match up with the Liberty's length. Stephanie White will be the one navigating the questions about rotation decisions and competitive gaps, and the distance between where this team is and where it needs to be. The executives making the decisions that created this situation will be insulated, protected by organizational hierarchy, and largely invisible to the public conversation. That is not acceptable. And it is our job, literally our job, as the analysts who refuse to cover up for comfortable narratives to make sure that accountability lands in the right place. Now, we get to the part of Stephanie White's media availability that genuinely alarmed me. Not frustrated me, not concerned me, alarmed me. Because what she said in this section reveals something about the organizational psychology of this team that goes beyond roster construction and financial decisions. It reveals how the people running this franchise are mentally preparing themselves and potentially preparing the public for a season that does not meet the expectations of a franchise built around the greatest offensive player in the history of the sport. When asked about the competitive standards and aspirations for this season, White offered a response that would be perfectly appropriate coming from the coach of a development stage team in the rebuilding cycle. She spoke about the value of the journey. She talked about shared experiences. She referenced struggles in practice and the relationships forged through adversity. And then she said something that I am going to quote precisely because the exact language matters. When she thinks back on her career, she said, It is not always about winning the championships and hanging the banners and getting the rings. It is about those days of struggle in practice and the journey with your teammates. Read that again and understand that this is the head coach of a team that employs Caitlin Clark in professional sports. There are contexts where journey-focused language is appropriate. When you're in a rebuilding year with a roster full of draft picks and developmental players, you manage expectations. When you're navigating an injury-devastated season that has derailed your competitive timeline, you talk about building culture and character. Those are legitimate uses of this kind of philosophical framing. This is not that context. This is a franchise with Caitlin Clark on its roster, the single most impactful player the WNBA has ever seen, in terms of both competitive performance and commercial transformation of the entire league. This is a franchise that entered the offseason with 80% of the league available in free agency. This is a franchise that should be speaking the language of championships, not because championships are guaranteed, but because the organizational standard has to be uncompromising excellence when you are building around a player of this magnitude. The window for elite athletes to compete for championships is brutally narrow. Clark is at the peak of her athletic prime right now. Every season that passes without meaningful progress toward a championship is a season that cannot be recovered. And when the head coach goes on camera before the first preseason game and starts framing the season's success around the beauty of the journey and the value of struggles in practice, it sends a very specific message, not necessarily to the players, but to the public, and perhaps even to the front office. It is the message of an organization that is already lowering the bar. It is the message of a coaching staff that